Good morning, CHD. Welcome to Pediatric Perspectives, where we're looking at children's health challenges from a different perspective, one that includes critical thinking, and we're not afraid to give you the honest truth. My guest today, I'm so happy to have back Dr. Ben Edwards. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. I just read or learned that you grew up in a small town there in Central Texas, and is it both your grandparents were medical doctors in town?
Both my granddads. Yep. My dad's dad and my mom's dad were both GPs, kind of those old school country doctors that could do it all. And they did. They delivered babies, did surgeries, you name it. They did.
Wow.
It
got
was
paid
awesome.
With chickens or something like that?
That's right. Yeah. My dad's dad tells a story of going out in the middle of the night one time to make a house call to deliver a baby, actually. And he brought his little doctor bag with the sterile OB pack, and he went into the back bedroom and unrolled that pack, had all his tools, his sterile field there on the bed, and a chicken flew through the window because it was a hot, Texas night, and the windows were open. This chicken flew through the window and landed on the sterile OB pack.
Wow.
Yeah, they had some really cool stories, and it was great watching those guys, growing up, watching them take care of the whole town.
I grew up in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and I was in a village for several years. So very similar experience as far as kind of just basic living. That must have influenced your career, I'm guessing.
It did, for sure. And probably more just the way they impacted the community. You could just see the community loved these guys, and they loved the community. And my mom's dad told me when I told him I wanted to basically do what they're doing, do small town country doctor. And he said, well, be sure to bring your psychology books, because mostly what these people need is counseling. They need someone to listen and, just care for, like a human being, care for them and love on them. And just, that goes a long ways when we do doctoring.
For those who don't know Dr. Ben Edwards, he went to medical school there at the University of Texas, Houston. You did your residency in family practice in Waco, and you were chief resident. Some people don't understand what that means. You have to be top of the top to become a chief resident. So I know your quality of background is just phenomenal. And you're now the medical director of Veritas Medical from when you founded that in 2012. It's still going on. I'm excited to talk to you about measles. Just, the media's shifted a bit towards pertussis, but they're not going to, I keep getting questions all the time in my world about measles and the fear of it all. I mean, just yesterday, a couple of my kids were asking me. So I think the update as of today in the USA, there's 884 cases. In Texas, 663, most of them being in Gaines County and Lubbock. And are you in Lubbock or in Gaines County?
I'm in Lubbock County. So Gaines County is a little bit south, about 90 miles or 100 miles or so south of Lubbock, which is where I went to treat the measles.
I would dare say you're probably the most experienced doctor in the United States as far as someone who's actually treated measles. And so maybe just very quickly for our audience, what did you see? What does measles look like in this day and age? And also, I'd be interested in just your comment on the supposed 2 deaths that I don't believe were from measles, but that's how they were reported in the media.
Right. Yeah. So I don't believe I'd seen a measles case prior to being asked to come to Gaines County and evaluate some children. So what I saw that first night, actually, it was at the viewing at the church of the first little girl who passed away. And the mother and father were fearful that the siblings who had measles at the time were fearful that they may need to go to the hospital too. And the parents did not want to go back to the hospital. But in those children, what I found, they were stable, the siblings were, and it was the typical rash, fever, cough, conjunctivitis, red, goopy eyes in some of the children. And then I just observed a lot of families walking into that church to pay their respects to the family of Kaylee, and just observing, I mean, just the classic rash, that red macular papular rash.
Wow. So several children came and were infected.
Yeah, I could see that first night that there were quite a few kids. I mean, it seemed like so many of these families had 6, 7, 8 kids each, and all pretty young that were coming to the funeral.
Yeah.
But then I was also asked that night to go visit a cousin, actually, of Kaylee, a little 4-month-old baby boy. And actually, there were 2 of the boys. They were twin boys. And that's where I first saw the kind of respiratory distress. Measles pneumonitis, I think, is the name that people are using for this. But just inflammation of the airway reminded me a lot of what I saw in adults during COVID. Just this inflamed, not pneumonia, just inflammation, hard to get the air in, the desaturation of the oxygen. These babies, they'll start retracting. That's the muscles in between the ribs and around the collarbone and the base of the neck just kind of suck in with every breath. You can just see they're struggling to move the air in. So I saw that first night in that baby. And knowing just, the secondary bacterial pneumonia, that comes afterwards, or at the very end of measles, or even days after the measles is resolved. So I wasn't thinking about a bacterial pneumonia. I really just thought immediately this is inflammation of the airway, and budesonide, an inhaled steroid delivered by nebulizer, worked so well during COVID. And we treated lots of COVID patients in our clinic, as did many frontline doctors. So I had that whole experience, and all my colleagues around the country who had the same experience. So I was very confident in budesonide, and I saw it that first night. It worked in that little baby.
Wow. So you were able to administer treatments right on the spot.
Yeah. Well, I had to run back to Lubbock to the pharmacy. There wasn't a pharmacy open on Saturday night in Gaines County.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we were able to do that. So the typical course that I saw over the ensuing days, when I saw a lot of kids, a kind of typical course was fever on day 1. Day 2, the fever kind of subsides, actually. Day 3, the fever comes back. The cough comes, the rash comes about day 4, give or take, and the fever really spikes. Day 4, 5, 6, rash is everywhere, high fever, cough is worse. Some kids get into that respiratory inflammation, pneumonitis picture there. And then day kind of 6, 7, 8, things start to fade away and clear up. The rash is clearing, the breathing's clearing, the fever's gone, and it's done. In the vast majority of cases, that's the way it goes, and it's no problem.
Yeah.
In a subset of patients, they tend to get more inflamed, and that's where the budesonide works. And in a smaller subset, the fever and the cough comes back on day 8, 9, 10, and that's the bacterial pneumonia. And you just treat that. I did not see any encephalitis, inflammation of the brain. That's another not common, but it can be a part of measles. I didn't see that.
Yeah. I've read that the measles rash starts at the head and kind of moves down the body. Did you experience that at all?
Yes, that's exactly what I saw in these kids. And I haven't had time to really do a deep analysis, but I started to sort of just monitor, because I actually made a lot of house calls in the area, and I would just sort of observe what I could as far as the food that was in the house. I mean, one house I went into, these little kids, they were walking by a pile of goldfish on the table.
And goldfish are not fish.
Right. The standard American processed fish. And I'm trying to disparage that family at all, but I'm very curious, because a lot of kids just pretty much breeze right through this, kind of what we read about in the textbooks. It's not a big deal. You have a fever, you have a rash, you get through it.
Right.
And so obviously I'm biased because I'm more of a nutrition-minded practitioner now. I didn't learn that in med school, but post-medical school, I got re-educated, or continued my education in nutrition. And I really started asking these moms about breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. And these breastfed babies, again, bias, it's just my observation. I don't have a study published on this, but these breastfed babies look better to me. They progressed well. I didn't have to treat them as aggressively. It seemed like the budesonide wasn't needed in those, where the bottle fed the ones that did get really sick, the 4-month-olds, 6-month-olds, The bottle fed, it seems. So I do think there's a nutritional component to this for sure. And that's what the literature is clear about with vitamin A in particular.
Right. So if you're a parent at home and let's say you live in Texas and you're in an area that's higher risk, I've got relatives in Canada, and there's a bigger outbreak going on in Canada. They're worried also. What would you advise parents to do? I mean, there's probably some preventative things that would boost your child's immune system so they're better prepared to fight measles if they happen to get exposed.
Yep. I always start with food. I mean, eat real food. Vitamin A, we talk about cod liver oil, which I consider that a food. That's a food-based supplement. But there's vitamin A in other animal products. So you need to eat good quality pasture-raised eggs. Really any animal fat, so real butter, heavy whipping cream from a good source, hopefully grass-fed, pasture-raised sources. Organ meats, which nobody really eats that anymore. You can get them desiccated in a capsule, but just high quality, nutrient dense food. I tend to follow the Weston A. Price kind of type of eating, ancestral eating. Eat what your ancestors ate. You want some colorful foods, the veggies and the fruits and the berries, get that deep color, purples, reds, oranges. It's really about building the body's resiliency up. And that's just on the nutrition side. Of course, we need to be out playing. We need to be in the sunshine. We need to just be like our ancestors were. And people don't realize that. I didn't coming out of medical school, but I definitely do now. This is all about building the body's resiliency. There's always going to be germs around. It's a matter of how do we defend against them? And there's definitely ways to bolster that immune system, and nutrition's a big part of that for sure. And honestly, cod liver oil, I think should be just a daily supplementation for everybody. It's hard to get enough vitamin A and D dietarily, and that's a great way to supplement. So that would be my number one. And actually, there's been a couple other little outbreaks trying to happen in Texas, these other Mennonite communities across the state that I've been made aware of. And the Mennonites from Seminole, from Gaines County, shipped cod liver oil over to those communities because they had some extra from what we had shipped into Gaines County. And I just got off the phone last night with a couple of these different Mennonite communities and waiting for the outbreak to surge because it's been a few days or a couple of weeks even.
Yeah.
It's quiet. Nothing's happening. Now,
So
it's too early and can't really say it's the cod liver, but I think it is.
I bet it is. So what dosing are you using for infants, toddlers, children, et cetera, for cod liver oil?
Yeah, so that's interesting and tricky. When you go straight to the literature, most of the literature, like in Africa, they're using just vitamin A, isolated vitamin A, water and fat soluble or oil-based and water-based vitamin A combinations is what the literature said was the best. And we're talking 80% reduction in mortality. And they use 200,000 IUs, international units, 2 days in a row.
Only 2 days, though, for our viewers. Never go more than 2 days if you're going high dose.
Yeah. So that's, an isolated form of vitamin A. The reason I choose cod liver oil, and there's about 3,000 to 4,000 IUs of vitamin A in a teaspoon of cod liver oil, which is a typical dose on a standard bottle of cod liver oil. So to get up to 200,000, you're talking bottles of cod liver oil. But what I've found, again, not published that I've found, maybe it is, I haven't seen it. I believe in the synergistic effects of food-based A. You have vitamin D with that, and then there's other nutritional cofactors in that food that work in conjunction with each other. And so I just have had folks really triple and quadruple their cod liver oil dosing. So if it's a teaspoon a day is the basic daily supplementation for that.
That would be a school-age kid, a teaspoon a day?
Yeah.
And maybe a quarter teaspoon for an infant?
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Okay.
And to overdose on cod liver oil or organ meats, it's unheard of. The Merck manual I found, these two Arctic explorers, they were eating polar bear liver, and I think it was seal maybe also, and which equated to millions of IUs of vitamin A, and they got a little vitamin A toxic, some headache and some skin changes, and they just quit eating the liver, and it went away in a day or two. Literally almost impossible to overdose on food-based cod liver oil.
Yeah, good point. When we had a big outbreak in my area, Portland, Oregon, some years back, I instituted it was in the Pediatric Red Book to give up to 2,000 IUs daily for 2 days. So I did that for cases that actually had measles. And Some parents wanted to do it preventatively because they thought their kids were exposed. I had an experience I have to share, and that is in infants who still had an open fontanelle, giving that level. Now for infants, it's just 50,000 for 2 days. I had 2 or 3 infants come with truly bulging fontanelles and vomiting from that high dose vitamin A. So you really have to be careful with it. How do you know if you're a parent that it's time to go to the emergency room? Like, when does it become a real emergency?
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely biased because the emergency rooms here, the experience wasn't great. But to the point on the question, respiratory distress. I will say I saw a couple, or heard about a couple, that got into GI distress, meaning lots of diarrhea. That was really rare, but they weren't taking oral fluids in, and they were having diarrhea repetitively, so they got dehydrated. So that would be another reason. But otherwise, respiratory distress, what I described earlier, in between the ribs, sucking in, nasal flaring, that's with each breath, the nostrils flare, the fast breathing rate. I mean, you can just look at your child and see they're really struggling to bring air in. A lot of people have home oxygen sensors now. Normals to be in the mid to upper 90s. You can kind of hang out in the lower 90s and be okay. You get into the 80s, that's a little worrisome. I would say you need to be talking to the doctor. You're getting in the mid and low 80s, that's a real problem. 70s, big problem. Now, I did have a few people call and say, hey, I'm in the 70s, but they weren't reading. The monitor was not picking up well, so that's a little caveat there. But respiratory distress is the reason. But if your doctor will give budesonide, I saw it over and over and over. I mean, immediate improvement in oxygen levels, and respirations decrease as far as the respiratory rate, the retractions, they just improved dramatically and quickly. And in these babies in particular, the dehydration, when they're breathing that fast and they're that sick and that high of a fever, they're not taking the bottle or the breast. But as soon as you bring that down, they eat, boom, that 4-month-old turned around so quick with just a breathing treatment and a bottle and got the hydration back.
Fantastic. Final question, and then I'll let you have your last thoughts. I really appreciate you being on. What are your thoughts about using the vaccine as a prevention for this? That's a tough question for a guy who's in practice. I can say it because I don't have a license anymore.
Well, what I try to do in my practice is informed consent with everything, not just MMR, but every medical procedure, but especially when you're talking about children. So we've got a healthy person that we're going to do a medical procedure to. We have to be super, super, super confident that that procedure is going to improve health because we have a healthy kid. And so that's why you have to look at risk benefit. And when it comes to the MMR and the data, there's so much data that I have discovered, even though it wasn't taught to me in medical school, and even the institutions that I've had an opportunity to interact with, CDC and HHS, there's a lot of ignorance, actually, just totally haven't even read some of these studies. So I try to point my patients to education material, to information, and let them choose. So yes, it obviously can help with prevention, but we always have to ask at what cost. Now, this could sound crazy, but like I've seen the other day, the best way to prevent a stub toe, to never have a stub toe, a big toe, will amputate your toe. You're 100% will never have a stub toe if you don't have a toe. Or, prevent cancer. How's the best way to prevent? Well, if we give you a daily dose of chemo the rest of your life prophylactically. I mean, those sound crazy, or extreme, but the point being, you have to consider risk benefit. And will it prevent, but does it create health, and what are the long-term health implications? And that's a whole nother show to talk about a hyper-vaccination schedule, especially early in life, stimulating the antibody production part of our immune system, suppressing the cell-mediated immunity, and getting that immune imbalance, because these are kids that we see in our clinic, immune system imbalanced. And these autoimmune diseases, these cancers in young people, it's a real question about risk versus benefit that we need to really have a conversation about.
In my 40 years of pediatrics, I never saw measles to be a threat to be worried about. I mean, it came through my town 2 different times, and the public health was all over it, but it never became a problem. Do you think parents should be worried? And if they are in an area where there's an ongoing outbreak, do you have specific different advice, perhaps?
My advice is always going to be, number one, deal with fear, because fear shuts down the immune system more than anything, in my opinion. And there's actually evidence and data to support that. It's all about building the resiliency, build the terrain, build your own immune system up so it can fight these germs. All germs. I mean, there's 10,000 viruses, more than that probably. There's influenza and influenza-like viruses, all kinds of coronaviruses, of course, COVID and measles. And I mean, we need to focus on building resiliency, number one, above all else, because that's going to give you your best odds of being healthy. Remember, that's the goal, not necessarily avoiding a fever or a symptom. It's mortality and morbidity. Can we live long and live healthy? That's the goal. That's the ultimate standard we need to consider on any question, especially as far as prevention goes into a healthy child. So absolutely no fear. Build the resiliency, do your research on preventative measures. And if you have peace about that preventative measure is going to build health in your body and build resiliency and help guarantee morbidity and mortality to be exceptional, then go for it.
Thank you so much. Wow. Dr. Ben Edwards, great to have you back on, and we will absolutely be calling you up again, because I just love your approach. And now that I learned you grew up a kid in a country town with grandparents who were the country doctors, no wonder you're so amazing.
I do owe it to my granddads for sure. And I believe if they would have got that phone call from Gaines County, they would not have thought twice. They would have been right down there doing what I did.
Yeah. And, that took a next level of bravery, because most pediatricians or doctors wouldn't risk their own neck, so to speak, to go into an area where obviously you're going to get massive exposure. So thank you for your courage and for everything you're doing for our kids.
Well, thank you, Dr. Paul. I know you put your neck out there too. So thank you for all you've done, and your books, your websites, and these interviews, and for all that Children's Health Defense does. It's incredible to have an amazing resource to point my patients to get information from.
Thank you. Well, folks, we're going to turn the tables, and none other than Polly Tommey is going to actually interview yours truly, me. So I'm in trouble now, aren't I?
Yes, you are in trouble. No, that was fantastic. Dr. Ben Edwards is amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
I saw him when I went down to the measles clinic, and he did not stop. He didn't even stop for lunch. He just kept going on and on treating. And he had measles at the same time. So there's that. So yeah, I have some questions for you. So we've heard from Ben Edwards about the measles and potentially how to treat them and things like that. But I want to talk about the MMR for a second as well, because it goes along with this.
Yeah.
And consistently out in the press, it says the MMR is safe and effective, safe and effective. No, we parents had no idea that there was an issue. Can you talk to us about the measles, mumps, and rubella? And actually, do you know what? I bet people don't even know what rubella even is. Maybe you could start by telling us what these illnesses are.
Yeah. Well, measles used to be called rubeola, and that's what we've just been talking about with Dr. Ben Edwards, and he outlined the disease. So there were these 5 diseases that caused red, pink rashes in kids. And there was measles, mumps, rubella, measles being rubeola, roseola, and Fifth disease. They're just these diseases caused by various viruses, and they had their specific, symptom ranges, and we've described the measles ones. But to get to your questions about MMR, I want to point something out. The MMR when they first came out with the measles vaccine in 1963-64, it was a single vaccine just for measles. And if you go back to 1964, I was born before that. Parents were not afraid of the measles. Measles, in the 1800s and the turn of the century, 1900, was a scary disease with a high mortality. Not so by the time we got to the 60s. Almost all mortality had gone, and it was just one of these nuisance illnesses with almost no one dying. So I remember reading about, I think it was Dr. Lang something or other. He was the top infectious disease specialist at the time, when he was asked, well, why are we targeting measles when it's really not a concerning illness? And he says, well, because we can. Why do you climb Kilimanjaro or Mount Everest? Because you can. What he didn't realize was that the vaccine was not going to give lifelong immunity. And so in effect, starting that whole program has resulted in now a host of new problems. We went from MMR that I forget, it was in the 60s, but when they went to MMR2, Merck that makes that vaccine, I believe it's Merck, something happened with the formulation. And this vaccine contains neomycin. It has glutamate, which is very excitatory and not good for brain, chick embryo cell cultures. It's got fetal bovine cow serum. It's got this W138 human diploid lung fibroblast from an aborted fetus. And there's all these things that have been linked now by studies to bowel inflammation and brain immunotoxicity. So it's activating the cells in the brain that turn into this chronic, almost autoimmune response against your own brain cells. And studies have measured antibodies against myelin basic protein in the brain and found that, for example, with kids with autism, they universally or almost universally have high levels of those antibodies. So we got a problem with this vaccine. I stumbled on one other problem, and I just checked on it yesterday, knowing we were going to talk about this today. If you look at the package insert for the MMR, you will notice that, remember, these are live viruses, and there's 3 of them: measles, mumps, rubella live viruses in this vaccine. For the measles component, actually for all the components, it says at least this amount. So they figured out that you have to have at least this amount of attenuated live viruses in the vaccine for it to work. There's studies from the past that when they went high dose with live viruses, even if they were attenuated, they caused death. They were very dangerous, so they went to lower dose. Well, there's no dose restriction on the current MMR2, which really gives me pause. I think this is a real problem in the whole safety profile of that particular vaccine.
I really want to hammer this home to these young mothers, okay? So they're freaking out from their point of view. 2 girls have died of measles. Well, first of all, let's put that right. Dr. Ben Edwards just did that as well. These girls did not die of measles, okay? So it's really important everybody knows that. So calm down on that. And I want to talk through what happens. So if they're in fear, they're going to go to their pediatrician. Now, there's good pediatricians and there's not so good pediatricians. So the first thing I want you to remind our audience is that as a pediatrician, you get bonuses for vaccinating children.
Pediatricians will deny it, but we get paid so much money for vaccinating that practices today, if you're on an insurance model, would not survive without the vaccines. Here's how it works. We buy it wholesale and we sell it retail. Now, the markup's not great. It may be $3 to $5 per dose. But when you're doing thousands and thousands of vaccines, every year, or if not every month, that adds up to quite a bit of money. The big bonus is called the admin fee. So for every antigen, so the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, is 3 vaccines in 1. The average, I would say, on the contracts, and every contract's different, is about $40 for the first antigen, $20 for each subsequent antigen. At the 1-year-old visit, and also at the 6-month visit now that they've added COVID and flu, there's 10 different antigens. So add that up. It's hundreds of dollars. And you get to do this at 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, again at 12 or 15 months, at 18 months. Pediatricians are making, just on the admin fee alone, over $1,000 per baby. I used to get 30 to 40 babies a month in my practice. So you can imagine the lost income when these families are not vaccinating. It ended up being over $1 million a year just for my practice. And I was only billing out about $3 million. You cannot lose 33% of your income. Remember, that's just one of the ways we make money on vaccines and survive. Overhead in pediatrics runs 70 to 80%. There's a couple other ways we get paid. You get bonuses for having your 2-year-olds fully vaccinated, or at least a very high percentage of them fully vaccinated. Cha-ching, here's a hefty bonus. Blue Cross Blue Shield was notorious for giving big bonuses for that, but other insurance companies do it too. And then finally, there's an incentive and disincentive that's really built into the system, making pediatricians weary of families who don't vaccinate. And that is this: if I have a low vaccination rate, I am considered a bad doctor. I am not providing quality care. It's a quality measure. And so I want my vaccine rate high, so I'm seen as a good doctor, and therefore I keep my insurance contracts. For one thing, I got dropped from a couple of plans because on the vaccine issue, I was one of the worst doctors. I didn't have any newborns getting hepatitis B, for example. Cha-ching, you just got an F. So there's also disincentives on everything you do in the office. You can get knocked down a few percentage points on how much they'll pay you, even when you're seeing ear infections or something unrelated to well child care and vaccines. All told, it's a massive amount of money.
This is really important. So our viewers need to understand this. So these young mums need to understand. So when you go in to get your informed consent or your advice from your pediatrician, he or she is being paid to, so there's a conflict of interest. So it's like being a salesperson. And so therefore they lie. Now, if I take my child to you and you've told me it's safe and effective because you're getting a nice bit of backhander, and you vaccinate my child and my child is injured, can I sue you?
You cannot. So, Polly, the 1986 Immunization Act took away all liability from the pharmaceutical industry that makes the vaccines and from everyone involved in giving the vaccines, recommending the vaccines, from the nurses who give them, the doctors who make the order and make the recommendation that it be done. Nobody can get sued. So, I mean, to me, that's the biggest disaster of all, because you've got a product that the manufacturers have no reason to make it better because they can't be sued anyway. I wouldn't vaccinate today, period. But if I was going to vaccinate, we better have a vaccine that's been thoroughly tested with long-term studies, with a proper placebo. And we're looking at all health outcomes. We're comparing vaccinated to unvaccinated. I mean, there's all these things that were never done for any of the vaccines on the childhood schedule. So we have a problem.
We have a problem because the other thing that young parents don't know is your child could actually die following the MMR vaccination or be severely brain injured. A lot of complications can go wrong from that. So the deaths of measles, real true measles deaths, compared to deaths of the MMR vaccine, I mean, it doesn't compare.
From experience and looking over this data, I've written a couple books that include this information, most recently VaxFacts. Your risk of death from measles, the disease, is about 1 in 1.6 million. It's not the quoted numbers if you live in the US, for example. Your risk of death from the vaccine is 1 in 100,000, 1 in 108,000. It's 10 times greater chance you will die from the vaccine than you will from the disease. Now, that's going to be debated by mainstream using different sort of science, if you will, that they have. But this is documented in a legal document, and it's in my book. The references are there. The other tragic thing that I just have to add, because I was a clinician. I was primarily just a busy pediatrician seeing sick kids, trying to take care of them, trying to help them become well. And when other practices started kicking kids out of their practices for not following the CDC schedule, these families came to my office. This is more speaking to autism, because you'll hear, oh, there's no link between MMR and autism. It's been proven. Garbage. That is totally not true. And if you were in the trenches like I was, and you hear these reports, and I know, Polly, you got a lot of these reports when you were on the bus. Kids go in, their child's healthy, they're given the MMR, usually with a lot of other vaccines, and sometimes within hours, sometimes within days, sometimes it was weeks or months, their kid regresses into nonverbal autism. Heck, you have your own story on this. It's a real thing, and that's also tragic. But these vaccines are killing kids. It happens. So as a parent, if you're analyzing risk benefit, get true informed consent.
That's absolutely right. And by true informed consent, we do not mean going to your pediatrician who's being paid to potentially lie to you. We mean watching CHDTV, listening to Paul Thomas, Dr. Ben Edwards, people who have lived it. And also, do you not agree? One of the best things, if you're not unsure about vaccinating, is go and speak to families that did vaccinate and then stopped vaccinating, because the difference there.
Yes. And you've done that, and I've done that hundreds of times. And it's remarkable to a family every single time you have a vaccinated child who was vaccine injured, they have a subsequent child who's not vaccinated, and they're a picture of health. And that's not explainable unless the vaccine's causing the problem. Because if you want to say it's genetic, well, the genetic risk is there for the siblings, and yet the ones who aren't vaccinated always are better off.
One last question for you. in my day, when I was young, 50 odd blah, blah, blah years ago, we went to parties to catch measles, and your parents would very disappointed in you if you didn't catch it. I know it says that it's extremely catchy, measles, but actually, trust me, in the day, we didn't always catch it when we were around. Even though we were sucking lollipops and passing them around, we didn't always catch it. But so why, in this day and age, you see parents are absolutely, people, teenagers, they're absolutely petrified of going near anyone that's got measles. Whereas in our day, like I say, we couldn't wait to get it over and done with.
Yeah. I mean, look at the example of amazing Dr. Ben Edwards. And he went into the lion's den, if you will, knowing he was going to be exposed to measles. And he actually had measles. And so it didn't really matter anyway, because he'd been exposed, got it. He probably was vaccinated. I forgot to ask him that.
He was. He had multiple MMRs.
That's what I thought, because in medical school, they forced us. I mean, I didn't need one because I was born in 57 and had measles as a kid, but I still was forced to get an MMR in medical school. But the thing is, you know, my sister went to rubella parties. We've always known that getting chickenpox over with was a great idea before the crazy idea of having chickenpox vaccines was added in 1995. If you're a pediatrician, the problem with recommending a measles party is the death rate from measles is not zero. So that's the tricky part from a doctor recommending it is, you know, if you were unlucky enough to have one of the kids you sent off to a measles party, maybe you didn't realize, you know, immune problems are hidden. You don't always know you've got an immunodeficient patient in front of you if they seem healthy. And so that would be that rare, unfortunate instance of a measles party going wrong. But for the most part, Polly, you're absolutely right. Back in the day, it was no big deal. And in the 60s, parents weren't afraid of measles.
No, they weren't. Well, thank you for letting me hijack your show. I think I might do that every now and then. Pop on in and hijack.
You are welcome anytime, Polly.
I'll let you end your show. But thank you, Paul Thomas, for everything that you do for us.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you for coming on and grilling me a little bit. Well, folks, it's always great to have you on this show. You can also find me at kidsfirstforever.com. I do coaching there. There's more information, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
And then we're going to write Kelly. She gets to travel up front with us all, Daniel, and all the others.
My name is Kim Thehoff,
And this is a story about your beautiful little girl, Kelly.
and this is her story.
All right, and it's only 2 months. She's only had 2 months.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what happened.
Well, I'm going to kind of start past when the event happened because there's more to the story. And this may be a lot of people's story. I've thought about this a lot. I know I can't be the only person this happened to. She died in 1980. But at the autopsy, the doctor that did the autopsy told us that there was encephalopathy, and he led us to believe that that happened when she died as a result of her dying. And I was a very young mother. I was only 22 years old, and I had no idea. You know, I was still in shock. Okay, I'd already been through the sheriff comes to the house and asks you questions, and they're going to make sure that there's nothing criminal that happened and those kind of things. So I didn't believe that a healthy baby could just stop breathing. None of us have to remember to breathe, but they said SIDS. That's what they said. And so for years and years and years and years and years and years, I knew nothing. So in 2011, I lost my job, and I got myself a new cell phone in August, and my older daughter, was asking me if I had been seeing or had heard about a special that was on CNN. And it's kind of a controversial subject, much like this subject, but it was Sanjay Gupta, weed. And I was like, no, I haven't heard of that. And so she tells me what it's about, and I'm kind of looking on my phone now because I can do that instead of sit at the computer. And I find it and I see what it's about, and that, it's about, this particular one was about children that had seizure disorders that were not controlled by medication. So they're giving these children marijuana, cannabis, to help control the seizures. So, I'm just do that, but I'm a voracious reader. And so I started thinking, what other things could I read about and look up and all kinds of things. And I just kind of, if you will, I kind of stumbled into vaccine injury. And just in November of 2015, I put it all together, what happened, because I had no idea. I mean, when they tell you SIDS, what do? You have no recourse. You just have to take it. And I've heard several stories of people that have said that they figured out later on that this is what happened. But oddly enough, the doctor who did the autopsy, the coroner's office, the hospital where she died, her pediatrician, nobody has any of her records. They're all gone. So I sent away for her death certificate so that I could see it, because I'd never seen it. I knew she was dead. I didn't need to see it, And so he wrote sudden infant death syndrome, and then the second reason he wrote was septicemia with a question mark after it. And when I started really looking up like encephalopathy and septicemia, how does a less than a 2-month-old baby get that? It had to be the vaccines. There was no other. Nothing else was going on with this child. She was perfectly healthy. She was perfectly fine. And people that I speak to on Facebook and, through email and stuff.
Do you remember how long after her vaccines that she died?
Well, back then we went for 6 weeks checkups, and we were getting ready to move from one part of one county to another. And so I remember I went for a 6-week checkup, and I think that she went with me. And so it was between 6 weeks and that week before we moved, and she was less than 8 weeks old. She was 7.5 weeks old when she passed away. And there was nothing. There was no sign. I mean, I put her down to sleep, and I, went back a couple hours later to check on her, and she was gone. I mean, and it was horrific. It was something that you never ever think is going to happen to you. And from that day forward, I've never ever thought that again, that anything couldn't happen to me, because probably the worst thing that could ever happen to me happened to me. So and I tried to get confirmation, but even I've heard so many people, even earlier today, the lady said, both those ladies this morning said they go back to the doctor and no doctor will say, and I think it's a crime. I think it's a crime that they can get away with saying this. And then I think of all the people, like when I went through the sheriff coming to the house and asking me questions and looking at her bed and the whole thing, and some people, people are in prison for doing something to their children that they didn't do, and, you're falling apart. I fell apart. I fell apart after she passed away, and, my marriage disintegrated, and if it wouldn't have been for my older daughter, I wouldn't have made it. And I know lots of people feel that way. And I'm sure there's some people that haven't. I believe that. It's a painful thing. And it's been 36 years, but it took me 35 years to figure out what happened. And so last year was the first year on her birthday and on the anniversary of her death that I had any idea what had happened to her. And so it kind of brought it all, a little closer to the surface, if you will. And there are some people that are still going through it, I mean, and people like your family and the Cholics, their children are injured and they live every day with that. I'm hoping that it changes soon. I believe it will.
There's no words really.
No, there are none.
She's adorable.
She was. And I believed in vaccines. I have 3 children. They were all, the one that was born after her, fully vaccinated, because I was clueless. And I didn't even find out until 2015 about the vaccine injury compensation program. I went and talked to my senator or my representative. She knew nothing about it either. It's not right.
So, what is your advice to the young parent, the young 22-year-old mother who is about to vaccinate her daughter because the doctors tell her it's safe?
She needs to do tons and tons of research. Back in 1980, there probably were people that knew that they weren't safe, but there wasn't a way to get that information out to the masses like there is now. And there wasn't an easy way to look at all of that, to go somewhere without leaving your home and taking your children and doing research.
What's incredible to me, that this was happening, so far back in the 80s and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If they just admitted the truth back then, none of our children
I know.
would
I
be
think
damaged.
about that. I think about
Think
that.
about all these babies here
Yes.
that would be saved
Mhm.
if they'd just done what they should have done in the first place.
That's right. If they wouldn't have lied, they would have listened.
Someone's asking you who your senators are.
Bob Hall is one of my senators. Well, Ted Cruz was one of my senators, state senators, but I went to my local. So Bob Hall is my representative in Texas, my senator, and Cindy Burkett is the woman that I spoke to that's in my district, 113, and she had no idea. She had no idea.
Well, we need to write your daughter's name on the bus. You've already submitted your story to Facts.com.
I
Well
did.
done. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Baby Kelly is up front with Daniel and our lovely girls. And so they will travel with us right to the end of the